They refer to the macaws and the worldwide hunters today as the Captain Ahabs roaming the high sea. There's reference to Coolidge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner in the middle part of the paragraph here of the what had been the free realm of ancient, not so ancient mariners. And then at the end you get another reference to the Leviathans of the deep running afoul of that regulation. Now, it's easy to initially read this and say that this could just be mere literary or rhetorical embellishment. And that's what I initially thought when I did the analysis of this particular decision. But Moby Dick comes up everywhere when I was studying the Makah Indians. There was a major trade publication, a commercial book actually, detailing the events of the Makah hunt. And it had an extensive subplot that the author was actually reading Moby Dick while he went to Washington State. And so he kept writing about the parallels between the book and what was happening to the Makah. Additionally, several newspapers used headlines that borrowed from Moby Dick, such as The Times. Coverage featured the headline, "The Modern Captain Ahab Wins Whaling Quota." The Australian that was covering this said the Makah Indians plan to resume whaling, use traditional methods that have not been known, that have been known to make Herman Melville's Moby Dick look like a lazy afternoon in the park. And so the question that I raised at this point is, why does the ghost of Moby Dick repeatedly surface in Euro-Americans' attempts to understand the Makah's hunt? And so what I look at is how Moby Dick is a culturally significant allusion that I've talked about that warns Euro-Americans of the risk that they face in challenging the sublime. And if you look at, I want to jump ahead a little bit, but these are some classic pictures of Moby Dick in American imagination. So here you've got Moby Dick, another cover of the numerous copies of Moby Dick that exist, another painting of Moby Dick, and then I managed to find, I didn't realize they made a 2010 remake of Moby Dick where he's some sort of primordial ancient creature that they're now hunting. But in all of these pictures, you'll notice that it's a terrifying, sublime object. It's not simply just part of nature. I mean, Moby Dick is a monster. It's something that, if you look at sublime sort of, from Edmund Burke, if you look at literary theory on the sublime, for instance, Burke argues that the sublime isn't just terrifying or beautiful, but it's something that that the mind cannot comprehend. That it stuns one when you confront the sublime, that you almost want to sort of bow to its magnificence. Be that because you're terrified of it or because of deep respect to the object. And so, in American imagination about Moby Dick, the whale is always operated as this sublime element. There's a lot of references within the decision that play upon this. Like if you go back to just this chapter here, or just this opening paragraph, Rime of the Ancient Mariner was also about, was a cautionary tale, much like Moby Dick. When you look at the origins of Leviathan, it's from the Bible, particularly the books Job and Psalms make reference to the Leviathan. It's either as a sea creature or as a whale. It's unclear. More importantly, though, the sort of disposition of the Leviathan is very unclear in the Bible. In some instances, it's a sign. It could be a sign for the devil. In other instances, it could be a sign for God. Either way, whether it's good or bad, the Leviathan is a symbol of sublime power in each of those chapters in the Bible. So my argument here is that when it's evoked, it's not just literary allusion, but it's very much sort of beholding the authority that is Moby Dick. It's a book that haunts sort of American consciousness. And so I wonder, why does the court bother to evoke it in this decision? And so I look at the larger context, sort of the legal system around this time. And there's a lot of legal theory that argues that the original sort of foundations for a legal system, broadly based, have been becoming undone by a host of challenges: globalization, multiculturalism, all of the legal groups that I talked about in the beginning in terms of critical race theory, critical legal studies. All of those criticisms have done a brilliant job and have been very productive, but they really have challenged a lot of sort of the basic foundations of how does precedence operate. What is legal authority? And so at this time you find a court that is rather broadly, the legal system is rather anxious about its authority on a broad level. What is the basis in light of all these criticisms, and particularly in a decision that deals with multiculturalism, international law, not traditional sort of areas of law for the court? Where does it get its authority to act, and on what basis do they make those decisions? And so when I originally read these decisions and tried to make those conclusions absent any analysis of Moby Dick, it was not clear. As I mentioned in the very beginning, there is a very clear 1986 Supreme Court case that says that the precedent in this instance ought to be the Dion decision, that unless Congress has said otherwise, their treaty outweighs any sort of domestic law that we have. And Congress made it clear that was their intent with this law. But this particular court ruled otherwise. And one of the reasons that I think they rule otherwise is that because of the anxiety that they have, they clutch onto Moby Dick early in this decision, but I think it informs itself throughout that they clutch onto not necessarily Moby Dick as just an illusion or as a symbol in the case, but to the idea, sort of the larger lesson that Moby Dick has taught within our culture, that we should have respect for the sublime environment, and that for the sublime sort of creatures that we don't understand. When in doubt, don't do damage to them, which is very much a sort of precautionary principle. But if you look at the actual, this is the full text of Chapter 69 of Moby Dick that the opening paragraph comes from. And you'll see in this description of the whale, the dead carcass they come across, it's not Moby Dick, it's another whale, that they describe it as very much as a sublime sort of ghost. That the desecrated body is a vengeful ghost that survives and hovers over it to stare. For years afterward, ships have shunned this particular location, and that it sort of stands against the laws of precedence. Here's your utility of prior traditions, dead, haunting you. And then the last part of it, and then this is the part that's cited in the decision, thus while in life the great whale body may have been a real terror, in death its ghost become a powerless panic to the world. And then it goes on to sort of mock the person that's being talked to about, do you believe in ghosts? Well, here's a ghost here. When I look back at the decision of how this thing gets used in the court decision, it's kind of interesting that let me just walk through parts of the Anderson decision, talk about the uncertainty, the anxiety, and why sort of the appeal to the sublime seems to make a lot of sense in this instance. In part of the Anderson decision, one of the first things they have to decide is whether the impact of respecting the Macaw's claim to hunt whales will actually hurt, what impact it might have on the environment. And what I find interesting is that they do not rule, and there is no evidence presented that says that it in fact will hurt the environment. This is the exact sort of wording of the decision. We conclude that there are substantial questions remaining as to whether the tribe's whaling plans will have significant effect on the environment. And notice here the court doesn't offer an argument as to why the hunt will in fact cause damage. It's a question. There's anxiety about it. There's actually some of the evidence offered said that they really doubt that it would have harm on this particular population, because there's actually a secondary debate that occurs about whether or not the whales live in this area in Washington State, or whether they migrate to the area temporarily to mate and then leave. And so it becomes a real question of, for the court, of how much damage would it take of one